That's a clown question, bro.
I'm Japanese!
So I'm gonna kick some dirt.
He gets on base.
Just a bit outside.
I'm not the type of player that's going to be Johnny Hustle.
If you don't want me to watch the ball, you can go get it out of the ocean.
Welcome to the show to be named later, where we're talking baseball kind of whenever. I am your host, Chris Gianta. Over on the other side of the screen is Daniel Curran. How you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing all right, Chris. We've got a lot of news to talk about today. We actually have potentially some baseball happening in 2020.
Yeah, this little history series might get cut short, which
I don't think we should. No, I think it should keep going. But we got a good episode as far as history today. We have Roberto Clemente, guy with 3,000 hits, one of the most impactful players in the history of sports, not just baseball. We also have the 1993 Toronto Blue Jays. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah. And if you're suggesting we keep doing history, I'm fine with doing like 3 episodes a week.
Yeah, no, I would be absolutely down for that.
Yeah, it would be, especially for the summer. I don't have much going on. I could talk about baseball 3 days a week, no problem.
Easily.
But yeah, definitely a legendary player, a legendary team we have to talk about. But
legendary moments within that team.
First, we just missed. Our week basically goes Tuesday to Tuesday, and on Wednesday, probably the biggest baseball news in the past maybe month came out. The Red Sox got their punishment or lack thereof, they lose and that's for 2018 stuff. I'm sure the people already know. They used the video room
to steal signs illegally during parts of the 2018 season.
Did they use it during the game, or
From what I read, it sounded like they decoded the signs like before games, and then during the games when there was a player on second, they would relay the signs to the hitter. Which relaying the signs from second is legal. It's the fact that they use technology to decode the signs, which makes it illegal.
Yeah, it's pretty wild because with the Astros investigation, the report was worse than the initial reports of cheating. This was the opposite. The athletic
they found nothing
that came out that made the situation look worse. And then when the MLB report came out, it wasn't as bad as the actual athletic report.
My big takeaway from the Red Sox report is that we didn't learn anything that we already knew.
Exactly.
Except for maybe the replay guy, but that's about it.
Yeah, we found out his name, and he was scapegoated. JT Watkins, he got suspended from baseball in 2020, and then he could come back in 2021, but not working in the replay room. And Red Sox also lost a second-round pick, and Alex Cora was suspended for the entire 2020 season, but only for what he did with the Astros, so nothing to do with the Red Sox in terms of punishment. Pretty decent stuff for a Red Sox fan. Kind of a sigh of relief.
One thing, obviously the main factor that you think about as a Red Sox fan is that Alex Cora didn't do anything wrong in Boston, according to this report. Everything that he's getting suspended for is retroactive to what he did in Houston. And he's essentially done nothing wrong in Boston, meaning at the end of the suspension, realistically, he could come back as the manager of the Red Sox. Like Ron Renicky is the current interim manager, and he was planning about retiring at the end of the year anyway. So why not just give it back to Alex Cora if he hasn't actually done anything wrong in Boston?
Yeah, the only thing that would get annoying is, whatever stigma he had with the Astros. And even, there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out in February?
It was late January, early February.
Yeah, I found out about it at a men's volleyball game.
So did I. I think I sent it to you, from the press box.
Yeah. That kind of might have made Alex Cora innocent there. But, first impressions are kind of anything. Once you're thrown into it, people don't forget it. So it'll just kind of be annoying, just being online if the Red Sox hire him back.
I mean, Alex Cora hasn't really spoken out and said anything, out there other than just like, I'm sorry and I accept my punishment. Like I remember Jeff Lunau when he got fired by the Astros and he got suspended, he put out a statement where he was like, I did not know about this. I'm not a cheater. This has nothing to do with me. Don't associate this with me. And then that Wall Street Journal article comes out that suggested that an intern with the Astros presented the idea of the code breaker to Jeff Lunau, and he was like monitoring how it was going. So obviously we're getting lied to on one end of the spectrum. It's either Jeff Lunau's lying or the Wall Street Journal is lying about that. And Alex Cora hasn't really put himself in a situation where he's putting words into other people's mouth. He's kind of just doing the bare minimum, apologizing, waiting for what is to go forward, and that's kind of what you're supposed to do in that situation. I think that puts him in the best case scenario to get a job further down the road.
Yeah, and I mean, all the stigma aside, he's also a great manager. Just to put like all that into perspective for the Red Sox, if you hire him back in 2021, you're better off than you are, with probably another option, unless like I don't know who would be better, and they definitely wouldn't be fired by whatever organization is there with them. But yeah, as Red Sox fans, we kind of had a sigh of relief, but wasn't the only baseball news out there. Unfortunately, Trey Mancini has stage 3 colon cancer.
Yeah.
There was a thing put out, I think it was early spring training. There was a health concern with him. It wasn't specified, so I guess a lot of people wondered if it was the coronavirus, and honestly, he'd probably be better off with the coronavirus. He'd probably recover from it a lot easier. But yeah, he has stage 3 colon cancer, which is terrible for the already ailing Orioles.
I mean, Trey Mancini is such an easy guy to root for. A guy on a team like that wants to be there. He wants to be a part of that rebuilding process. And when they figure it out, he wants to be the guy when the Orioles are back in a position to compete. And it's really something to admire out of a player that you don't see that often, especially someone entering his prime like Mancini. And he's just a really good guy, and that's not something you would ever want to see from anybody, but especially him.
Yeah, it's really tough. A really talented guy, one of the better right-handed hitters in the league.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely wish him a speedy recovery. But I mean, that was pretty much all of the MLB news, if I'm correct.
Well, there was Passan put out a report that said like Manfred is confident that there is going to be baseball this year.
Yeah,
he's confident. There was a proposal. I don't know who put this out, but there was some proposal to have 3 divisions where it's basically the East, Central, and West. No AL, no NL. Nobody plays outside of the division. And I don't know if you saw this, Chris, but if you read deep into Passan's article, there was a suggestion that if there's a second wave of coronavirus and we can't really have a season, he suggested like a big playoff with all 30 teams where from October 1st to 20th, every team plays a 4-game series against each division opponent with a day off in between, and the top 2 teams from each division advancing. So that would be 12 teams. 10 teams. 10 teams advancing. And then from October 22nd to October 21st, the 6 American League teams, no, that would be 12 teams, I'm wrong. The 6 American League teams that advance congregate at one hub. The 6 National League teams gather at another. They play each other They play each of the other 5 teams twice in a round-robin format with a collective day off in the middle. The 4 teams with the best record in each league advance. In the meantime, the 9 non-advancing teams from each league will meet at a hub and play 1 game against the rest of the teams there. The winner of that round robin regains entry into the playoffs. In the case of a tie, a winner advances 1 game play into the playoffs. On November 2nd, we're getting into November now. The play-in winners faces the number 4 seed and from the advanced round robin and a 1-game wild card. Winner advances to face the number 1 seed. And then we're pretty much just getting into the normal playoffs. You get from the November 3rd to the November 9th, a division series from November 11th to November 19th, the CS Championship Series, and then the World Series in late November to early December. How about
It
that?
would basically be like pool play into like actual playoffs.
Imagine Thanksgiving with a side of World Series baseball.
Yeah, I mean, the only problem baseball would really run into is interest, because Thanksgiving you think of
Football.
football, obviously, and yeah, that would be definitely an interesting dynamic, because I'd definitely be rather watching baseball, but
I would definitely be watching baseball. Yeah.
I don't think my family would be interested. The rest
Hey, yeah,
the
that's
rest
the
of my
World Series.
family.
You gotta do what you gotta do. So that is obviously hopefully that's not the case, because that's in the case of a second wave of coronavirus. God forbid, we don't want that. But he's hoping, Manfred is hoping, maybe late May, early June. If we have to go in July, we go into July. But there is optimism that there will be baseball in 2020.
Yeah, th- things are getting better. I mean, the only thing that, like, I feel like the Yankees and Mets would have a tough time. I don't know what they would do. I feel like,
Yes. Yeah, because New York is obviously the epicenter for coronavirus, especially New York City. Actually, Queens in particular is like the worst borough, and that's obviously where the Mets play. So I'd be
yeah,
really intrigued to see what they plan on doing there. Obviously, New York is supposedly past its peak and on the downfall, but we'll have to see if that continues. And obviously, everything's up in the air. We can't confirm anything at this point. It's too early to do so, but I'm really hoping there's baseball in 2020.
yeah. Worst case, you could go to like an out of state minor league facility. I mean, there's not going to be fans. The clubhouses can't be that bad.
Hmm.
I mean, it would be it would be funny if they were in like Connecticut or something,
Yeah.
Hartford, where the Yard Goats play. But yeah, that would kind of throw off minor league baseball. But you know, definitely some hope in the baseball world, as things are looking better than they were, maybe a couple weeks ago.
Hmm.
So there we go. There is the baseball news of the week. Now it is time for the rest of the episode, which will be dedicated first to Roberto Clemente and second to the 1993 Toronto Blue Jays, who had one of the greatest team anthems ever. I mean, once you hear it, it just can't get out of your head, for
We're
sure.
gonna say that for the very, very end of the episode too.
Yeah, yeah, and
It's a sponsored anthem, but a good
it
one
is a
nonetheless.
sponsored anthem, correct. And we do free ads because we don't have actual ads, so
No.
whatever, it's fine. But Roberto Clemente, we'll start off with basically how he was shaped as a human being. Born in 1934 in Carolina, Puerto Rico. He was the youngest of 7 children.
Yeah. It's a busy life, busy household.
So yeah, he lived an interesting life growing up. He would use money from side jobs to buy rubber balls, and he would squeeze those to make his hands stronger, which definitely worked out for him in the end. And he would go to winter league games. I know there was a story where local Puerto Rican kids would like take players' luggage, and they would kind of get them into hotels for free.
Yeah.
It was like hotels or some type of housing complex. They would get them in for free by just carrying luggage in there. And he actually met one of the people he carried luggage for in the MLB. I think it was I forget the name, but
Okay.
yeah, he would go to winter league games. Definitely inspired from that. And in high school, that's where he really got going athletically. Played baseball, did the high jump, and also did the javelin, which the javelin definitely ultimately helped him out there. You're going to find out.
Great practice. Great practice.
Yeah, great practice. Definitely could definitely was very good at throwing things, for sure. And he was also said to have been possibly good enough to compete for Puerto Rico in the Olympics for javelin, not even baseball.
I believe it.
Yeah, I totally believe it. If you can throw a baseball 320 feet, I definitely believe you have some javelin skill in there.
Hmm.
And his baseball skill definitely
Definitely.
rose. He took part in a tryout camp where major league scouts were there. The Brooklyn Dodgers definitely took notice. Their scout Al Campanas really took notice. And Clemente also played for a professional Puerto Rican league. Started when he was about 18 years old and played for 2 years before the MLB. So it was basically like a basketball season. It was 1952 into 53, and then 1953 into 54. And he actually played in the Puerto Rican League well into his major league career. And then ultimately, Dodgers vice president, Buzzy Bavasi, which is a very interesting name.
Great
Buzzy
name.
Bavasi gave Al Campanis permission to sign Roberto Clemente. So now Roberto Clemente was affiliated with Major League Baseball. Finally.
And when most people think about Roberto Clemente and his major league career, you think about the Pittsburgh Pirates, and why would you not? That's where he played his whole major league career. And I bet most people didn't know that he actually initially was signed by the Dodgers. And there's a really interesting story about how he actually got from Brooklyn to Pittsburgh. And Clemente was signed to a $5,000 salary with a $10,000 signing bonus. And back then, the rules were that teams who signed players for more than $4,000 to play in the majors, they had to play for at least 2 years, or they could risk losing them in the Rule 5 draft the next year. And the Dodgers had him in the minors, but they tried to avoid him. They tried to hide him from scouts so that nobody would draft him when he got in the Rule 5 draft because they really liked him. And I mean, they would literally pinch hit for him in the first inning anytime they saw a scout there. And lo and behold, the Pirates had the worst record in the league the previous season, and they picked Clemente number 1 overall in the Rule 5 draft. And the Pirates GM at that time who signed Roberto Clemente, that was Branch Rickey, who is known for signing Jackie Robinson. So Branch Rickey, a guy who signed Jackie Robinson to the Dodgers, and he signed Roberto Clemente to the Pirates. Obviously, he's a Hall of Famer, and that you see is why. He also played in the Puerto Rican League with Willie Mays from 1954 to 55. I'm sorry, was it the minors?
It was in the Puerto Rican League, yeah.
It wasn't the Puerto Rican League. Okay. So he played with Willie Mays there, which, that turned out to be basically the face of 1950s baseball, along with Hank Aaron and Mickey Mantle. And he had to – one thing you're going to learn a lot is that playing the majors and being that sort of personality wasn't exactly the easiest thing for Roberto, and he had to go through a lot of tough times in his life, one of them being he lost his brother Luis to a brain tumor, and then he got in a car accident that damaged his spinal discs, which would affect him his entire career. This guy had to go through a lot. Losing a family member like that when you're about to embark on this huge journey to the majors can really get to you. And it was kind of held with him his whole career.
Yeah, so yeah, he loses his brother, and then he gets drafted by the Pirates, and Pirates don't want to make the same mistake that the Dodgers did, and they get him right into the major leagues. Made his MLB debut on April 17th, 1955, actually against the Brooklyn Dodgers.
How perfect.
How fitting. And he didn't have the greatest start to his career. He started his first season was his age 20 season, so it was very hard to adjust, and he was actually able to get the start on the team due to a Pirates outfielder holding out for more money, and then he actually got sick, so he was there the entire year and the rest of his career. And although he wasn't doing great on the offensive side of the ball, fans were really excited by his spectacular defense, whether it was his fantastic range or his amazing arm. And he had 18 outfield assists in his rookie year, and his 16 from right field actually led all right fielders, and that's him as a 20-year-old. So he's just getting started in the outfield. Then the next year, he actually takes a step up. It's probably his best offensive year of his first 5 years in the league. He hits .311, which was third in the National League, and but he only had a .761 OPS, which was still above average, but definitely didn't really match the .311 in terms of offensive production. And that was in 1956. Took a step down in 1957 with a .637 OPS. Then in 58, definitely improved. Not still kind of below average on the offensive side, but had 22 outfield assists in 1958. But yeah, of course, not great offense. He had a very tough time drawing walks, and he also had back problems due to that car accident that Daniel mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
And he faced criticism because, people kind of stereotyped him thinking he was lazy, because he would also, play through the paint sometimes, and people thought, oh, you're just complaining about nothing then if you're able to play through it. It's like, no, he was able to
Pull through.
because
He's a trooper.
he was a very tough guy, and had a lot of character, obviously, which is why we're talking about him. And he definitely faced some sort of discrimination or just unfair treatment. Journalists would actually quote him in broken English. They would spell words out kind of in
How he would seem to
his
pronounce them.
accent, which is weird. So instead of big, it would be beeg, like B-I-G. It would be B-E-E-G
Mhm.
Instead of B-I-G. More stuff like that, kind of subtle things that probably definitely angered.
It can get to you.
It was pretty unfair to Clemente.
Yeah, I mean, he's in a new territory, Puerto Rico, especially back in the early 1960s, so much different from the United States, and there's a lot expected of you if you're going to be a major leaguer. And, living up to that sort of expectation is hard. And, it starts with the little things like that, like, trying to learn how to speak English. And obviously you're not going to be great at it at first. And he was kind of mocked for it almost by the media.
Yeah, which is, definitely bad character from
Mhm.
the media at the time. I think it's definitely gotten way better since then. They're definitely more in tune with what's going on now.
Yeah.
I
So
agree.
in 1960, he actually made both All-Star games. That's right. There were 2 All-Star games for a brief period of time included in that time period. He finished 8th in the MVP voting in 1960, and he was actually sort of upset with this. He thought that he deserved a little bit better, not to win, but better. He had a career high in runs, a career high in hits, walks, home runs, RBI, average, OBP, slugging, and OPS. By far the best season he had had in his young career to that point. He led the league in outfield assists as well. And the Pirates ended up going to the World Series that year. And Roberto hit safely in all 7 games of that World Series. Of course, they won on Bill Mastrowski's walk-off home run against the Yankees. And Roberto ended up hitting .310 in the World Series. And the Pirates were actually outscored 55-27 in the series, yet they still won, unbelievably. And a great story about that I've heard is that Clemente actually, after they won the World Series, went out and partied with the fans in the streets instead of with the team. Like, he felt that he was one of them, more so than another Pirates player, which I guess say what you want about that. Maybe it doesn't sound completely ideal, but he found a way to enjoy himself when it might not have been easy to, which is obviously really great for him. So moving on to 1961, he wins the batting title, hitting .351, his first of plenty. He had a .949 OPS. He made both All-Stars once again. He won his first Gold Glove, and he had the most outfield assists in 17 years, 27, and no one has gotten that many since, unbelievably. He finished fourth in the MVP. And he also won batting titles in 1964 and 65. And going forward to 66, he hit .317 with an .896 OPS. He set a career high in home runs with 29, RBIs with 119. Once again, he led MLB in outfield assists. He hit .400 with an 1164 OPS with runners in scoring position, and he won the National League MVP in 1966, finally getting what he deserved.
Yeah, he finally gets that MVP. Yeah, definitely an extremely good year. That was the hitting .400 with runners in scoring position was absolutely insane to me, especially for a whole year. So then it goes to 1967, where he once again wins the batting title. Surprisingly enough, between 64 and 67, there was 1 year where he didn't win the batting title, and he won MVP that year. So that was an interesting thing. He hit .357 in 1967, had a .954 OPS, led the MLB in outfield assists again, and finished third in the MVP voting. Then in 1968, he actually led the National League in position player wins above replacement for the only time in his career, but did not get any MVP votes, which I guess is understandable at the time because his offensive numbers didn't really jump out. It's just
more defense.
I guess it was the defense that put him over there, and also the you think he gets MVP votes, but also there is no way he was getting that MVP because that was the year Bob Gibson won the National League MVP.
Yeah.
He had a
One of the best
1.12 ERA. And then in 1969, he's still going along. 1969, that's when he was 34 years old, still doing it. 1969, he hits .345 with a .955 OPS, and then in 1970, hits .352 with a .963 OPS. Almost identical seasons, but very, very high production from Clemente there. And then in 1971, the Pirates have a very good year. Fun fact, he was part of the first all-minority lineup on September 1st in that 1971 season. I found this out from a documentary about Doc Ellis's no-hitter, which is very interesting no-hitter. If you don't know about it, look it up. And he hit, and not only did he do that in 1971, not only was he a part of that in 1971, he hit .341, third consecutive year that he's hit .340 or above, and he had an .871 OPS and finished fifth in the MVP voting. But it's not what he did in the regular season that was memorable in 1971. It's what he did in the postseason. In the NLCS, he did very well. He went 6 for 18, hitting .333. Also hit the go-ahead single in the series clinching NLCS win, which was in Game 1 or in Game 4 of that series. Apologies, but in the World Series, that's when he really
turned it on.
Things together. Yeah.
I have to, before you begin with the World Series, I was watching a documentary about him, and before the 71 World Series, Roberto Clemente was about to be playing in front of the whole world for the first time. Pittsburgh's obviously not a big baseball market, and back then when you think of the great baseball players, you think of Aaron, Mays, and Mantle. Those were like the big three. And Clemente was kind of that fourth guy that was like just a tier below that wasn't getting as much recognition. And there were a lot of people that said like Roberto Clemente was essentially baseball's best kept secret at the time. Like they had the best player in the league that nobody even knew about. And before that series, he gave the media a quote that said something along the lines of, "I'm better at anything in baseball than anyone else." He said this to the media, and I love that he does this right before he goes on the national stage, because what he did after saying that backs up essentially everything that he said in that quote.
Yeah. I guess he proved it, at least for that year, for that series. He hit 414, had a 452 on-base percentage, a 759 slugging for a 1210 OPS, had 2 home runs and 4 RBI. And he really showed it in all elements of the game. I mean, in Game 6, you know, it's not a offensive thing, but he showed off the cannon for the world, as you mentioned, for the first time, which is what we're going to show you right here.
That's right. Crazy throw.
Crazy throw. I'm going to rewind to see what that right field marker actually said. Did it say 309? So that's
the 300-foot throw.
That's a 300-foot throw, and not a lot of arc to it either.
No, that was on a line.
Yeah, absolutely. An absolutely crazy play. That was in Game 6. The Pirates actually didn't win Game 6 despite that throw, and also he had a homer. He had a homer in that game as well. Mm-hmm. But that led to a Game 7 where Roberto Clemente had probably the most crucial hit of the series. It's 0-0. It's 0-0. You got Jim Palmer on the mound, if I'm not mistaken, who was, one of the best pitchers in the game at the time.
Future Hall of Famer.
Future Hall of Famer, indeed. And Clemente comes up, and he's trying to break the tie. So, he breaks the tie, and that was not Jim Palmer. I think I'm remembering another game. But he still hits the home run, gives them the 1-0 lead. They end up winning the game 2-1, and Clemente ends up winning his second World Series of his career and wins the World Series MVP. So he hit safely in all 7 of those games as well. And I don't know if you remember from earlier in the episode, he hit safely in all 7 World Series games in the 1960 World Series.
That is a 14-game hitting streak in the World Series lifetime.
A 14-game hit streak in the World Series. You just don't see stuff like that from other players.
No.
So that leads him into his 1972 season. It's his age 37 season. He's not really slowing down. Has a 312 average and an 835 OPS. And then in his last regular season at bat of the season, he comes up, which was this was his second at bat of the day. Yeah. So they might have taken him out after this. But nonetheless, it was his last regular season at bat of the season. and he has 2,999 hits. Becomes the 11th member of the 3,000 hit club.
Beginning to that season.
Yes, and ends the 1972 season with exactly 3,000 hits. And that closes the book on what was an incredible stretch. That 12-year stretch from 1961 to 1972. He slashed 331, 377, 507 with an 884 OPS. Also between 61 and 72, a Gold Glove
Every single year.
Every single year.
Didn't miss once. It was just a lock.
Did not miss once. He was also third in wins above replacement. That, of course, is behind Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, who
No
are
shame in losing to those guys.
two of the all-time greats, probably top 5 baseball players of all time.
Without a doubt, those two are top 5.
And he was second in hits from that stretch, and he was also first in average with a 331 average over a 12-year stretch. One of the most insane things ever to happen.
So, unfortunately, after 1972, his career did not take the turn that everyone was hoping. On December 21st, 1972, an earthquake hit Nicaragua, another Latin community that was near and dear to Clemente's heart. Not the one he was from, but he was a very popular guy out there. And he promised to provide relief for the earthquake victims and get on a plane and go there to help out the citizens who were in need. So on December 31st, 1972, Roberto Clemente hopped on a plane going to Nicaragua with a lot of emergency medical supplies, and unfortunately, the plane ended up crashing into the ocean, and Roberto Clemente tragically passed away at the age of, I believe it was he 38, 37?
I believe he was 38.
He was 38. An absolute tragedy. Probably one of the most shocking deaths in the sports world at that time. This was a guy who was incredibly influential to the Latin American baseball community. A lot of people consider him to be the Latin American version of Jackie Robinson, and there is a lot of validation to that statement. I know that that's very strong. You know, Jackie Robinson, he broke the color barrier. And Roberto Clemente, he wasn't the first Latin American baseball player, but he was the superstar that put Latin American baseball on the map. You know, a lot of the Latin guys that we see today, guys like Francisco Lindor, guys like Javier Baez, Yadier Molina, going back to like Pedro Martinez, Vladimir Guerrero, David Ortiz, their roots all kind of start with Roberto Clemente, a guy who is an amazing humanitarian, a class act, a genuinely great person. We can talk, Chris and I can talk all day about the great player he was, but he was an even better person. And to lose him like that is unbelievably tragic, incredibly heartbreaking. He had a son. He left his wife behind. And, you know, he died in a way that I guess is somewhat characteristic. He died trying to help others, of course, not exactly how it was meant to happen, but the baseball world missed out on an incredible man who could have done a lot of help. And in fact, he planned on building a sports complex in Puerto Rico after retiring. He also would hold baseball clinics to underprivileged youth free of charge, and he was known to hand out money to strangers. This was someone who was put on this earth for the purpose of helping other people. And although his life may have been cut short, he did everything he could while he was alive to build that narrative, and he did it out of the goodness of his heart. He didn't do it for attention. He didn't do it to give himself a better image. He did it because he wanted to. And I think the fact that he did this on New Year's Eve, especially, on New Year's Eve, a day where everyone goes out and has a good time, he instead took to the heart of doing what was good in his mind. And tragically, it had to end like that. But nonetheless, incredible person, incredible baseball player, and just a horribly tragic event for not even the baseball world, just the entire world in general.
Yeah, and you speak about New Year's Eve. There was actually someone, I forget the name, but a teammate was helping him out with loading the plane, and the teammate suggested getting on the plane, but Clemente was like, no, you should enjoy New Year's Eve. So it kind of it ultimately showed what he was as a person, where he didn't have his teammate get on the plane with him. He let him enjoy himself that night. So it definitely shows that. But, Clemente, obviously one of the human greats, also, obviously a baseball great as well. He, as I mentioned before, ended his career with exactly 3,000 hits, which is 32nd all time. And of 87 men, there are 87 men in MLB history to have 10,000 career plate appearances, and his 317 average is 15th all time. Definitely a top percenter with that. And his fielding might have been actually more impressive. Getting 3,000 hits is incredible, but his 12 Gold Gloves is 6th all time and first among outfielders. Among all outfielders in baseball history, he has the most Gold Gloves, and he also, since 1920, which is the live ball era, has the most outfield assists in MLB in MLB since the live ball era. So yeah, and he also, in 1973, there was a special election for him to get into the Hall of Fame. Got in with, I guess, 92.7% of the vote, which was extremely high at the time. And I don't know, the writers are kind of weird like that, but yeah. 92.7% of the vote, gets in the next year in 1973.
Traditionally, the rule is, and to this day, the rule is that when you retire or when you stop playing, you have to wait 5 years to get on the ballot. Roberto Clemente was actually the very first person that they waived that rule for. He was it immediately after his tragic passing, and the MLB has done a lot to commemorate how great he was, both as a player and as a person, since his passing. The Roberto Clemente Award is given out to a player every season who displays excellent work in their respective communities. There are a lot of players, guys like Yadier Molina, I believe, has won it. Carlos Beltran has won it. Carlos Carrasco won it last year. And there are a lot of players that have been very accomplished where the Roberto Clemente Award is still their favorite thing that they've won.
Yeah, I think Curt Schilling won
it in 2001.
Yeah. Yeah, and he says it's one of the most, I think in his accomplishments, it's that, and I think he won some players awards that were voted amongst the players. But yeah, the Clemente Award definitely stuck out for him.
Yeah, and the bridge that you see behind me in my background, that is the bridge adjacent to PNC Park. It was renamed the Roberto Clemente Bridge, of course, to commemorate the great baseball player and the great person that he was. And the Roberto Clemente Museum also opened in Pittsburgh in 2011, which, by the way, the fact that they opened the museum in Pittsburgh, that's not even the main community he was a hero in, which really speaks to how loved this guy was. Obviously, he played in Pittsburgh, but his fan base was down in Puerto Rico, and the people that enjoyed him the most were down in Puerto Rico. to have that, strong of a connection both in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in Puerto Rico and all of Latin America, it really speaks to your character, and that's the one thing he was better at than anybody else. And lastly, MLB celebrates Roberto Clemente Day on September 18th to honor his life both in baseball and in the community. So Roberto Clemente, his legacy is the greatest humanitarian in baseball, a role model for everybody in and around the game, and just in and around life. Like, Roberto Clemente is someone you should strive to be like, no matter who you are.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you imagine what, if he continued with his life, what he could have accomplished, throughout life. I mean, he was born he would be 85, 85 today.
Yeah.
So yeah, he probably would have had a whole lexicon of stuff that he did. And luckily he has that award that inspires people to do what he would have done.
Yeah, he has that, and he also obviously he put Latin American baseball on the map. He's the icon that set the stage for all the guys that we now know today, like I mentioned earlier. And I mean, he's probably the closest comparison to Jackie Robinson that you can really draw among other MLB players.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He wasn't the first Latino American player, but he was pretty much the Jackie Robinson of Latin American baseball. That's basically the hero of that community, and now there's a ton of Puerto Rican players.
Yeah. I mean, I remember in the World Baseball Classic in 2017, you see watching those games how much pride those guys have representing their respective lands, whether it be Puerto Rico, whether it be the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, Cuba, wherever it is. They have so much pride representing their countries, or not their countries, but, wherever they are playing. But Roberto Clemente is sort of the guy who originated that. Like, he was very, very proud to be from where he was from, and he walked around with that sense of pride from being from Puerto Rico on an American baseball team.
Yeah, there was also a thing early in his career where some of his baseball cards would be changed to like Bob Clemente, and he really wanted it to be Roberto, and he said Roberto proudly because it was so, it was so unusual in Major League Baseball for there to be, a Roberto in the league, but he definitely had that pride. He didn't hide it at all.
And that takes a lot more courage, in that timeline than it would now. This was during the American Civil Rights Movement, where you had guys like Martin Luther King, you had guys like Malcolm X, and obviously Jackie Robinson was the main symbol of that for baseball, but Roberto Clemente was a close second. And for him to, insist that his name be Roberto on his baseball card is a symbol of pride during a time where there wasn't a lot of it in America among minorities.
Yeah. So definitely a guy that's a great example of the kind of person you should be, someone who doesn't back away from their origins. And definitely, this is why I picked him as one of my 30. Definitely a guy whose story is worth telling and should be told for the rest of time, for the rest of baseball history.
And I think number 21 should be retired throughout the whole league.
Yeah, it should. It could absolutely be done. I mean,
who's complaining? Who's complaining if that happens?
42 was retired kind of semi-recently, like 20-something years ago.
Yeah, it was like in the 21st. I wasn't like 99 or something like that, or like 2000.
97, 99, something like that. Yeah.
It was not that. It was 50 years after he played his first game. So I mean, I could absolutely see 21 getting retired throughout the league at some point, and I think it deserves to be.
Yeah, and I remember I think Andrew McCutchen one time he wanted to wear 21 honorarily as a Pirate, but I don't think it was allowed because 21 was retired. But
yeah,
definitely something that could happen in the future for sure.
So that just about closes the book on Roberto Clemente, an amazing person, an amazing story, and an amazing baseball player, and someone we should all strive to be like every day.
Yeah. That will lead us into the second half of the episode where it's gonna be a little less somber, gonna be more happy, gonna have a great song to go with it all. Which definitely a more happy half of the episode. But yeah, keep Roberto Clemente in your thoughts. We will be talking about the 1993 Blue Jays in the snap of a finger. And we're back for the 1993 Blue Jays. We're going to get right into it. Daniel, go over the context of these want to be, but hopeful back-to-back champions at the time.
That's right. So, of course, as Chris just mentioned, back-to-back, the Blue Jays won the 1992 World Series. They beat the Braves in that series. A really good team, obviously, but they had they had to go through some obstacles. They lost Dave Winfield, who finished fifth in the MVP voting the previous season. He signed with Minnesota in free agency. That was like his age 40 season, too, that he finished fifth in the MVP voting. So that's obviously not a guy you want to lose. Also, starting pitcher Jimmy Key, who had a 3.9 B WAR in 92, he went to the Yankees. So obviously you're losing a key bat and you're losing a key pitcher. However, they were able to re-sign Joe Carter, big power bat, who was a free agent. They were able to get him back. They also signed Paul Molitor, and they signed Dave Stewart. So
they dropped one Minnesota guy and they got another Minnesota guy.
That's right. Except he wasn't Minnesota natives.
Yes.
Not team related. But this team did not get off to the best of starts. In fact, on May 15th, they were 18-18, Chris. They were exactly 500. They had the seventh best record in the AL, and they were fourth in the AL East, 4.5 games back. Not exactly the start you want to see when you're trying to defend a title.
Little World Series hangover.
One could say that. But they were able to pick it up in the rest of the first half. There was a game where they played the Mets at Shea Stadium, and they saw an old friend of theirs, Tony Fernandez, who just didn't look right. He wasn't hitting well, and he didn't look happy. So they decided, you know what? I think it's the Mets. Let's bring him back. They traded for him on June 11th, and he proceeded to hit 328, 398, 529, 928 for the remainder of the first half. So a pretty good move for them. They get a good second baseman. Their shortstop, Dick Schofield, actually got hurt, so that was an easy replacement for him. The team went into the All-Star break 49-40. They had the best record in the AL, despite having a 5-game losing streak going into the break. They still had the best record in the AL at the break. And the Blue Jays were able to send 6 players to Baltimore for the All-Star game, and they were Paul Molitor, John Olerud, Devon White, Dwayne Ward, their closer, Roberto Alomar, and Pat Henkin. And Henkin, as I mentioned earlier, he was in his age 24 season, his first full season in the majors, and he went into the All-Star break 13-6 with a 3.54 ERA in the first half. I'd say that's an easy All-Star nod. And also John Olerud, who is a really interesting player, and you could probably make a Hall of Fame case for him, was doing particularly well at this time. A 395, 392, 671, 1163 in the first half. He had a 395 average, folks, and his average actually was above 400 as late as August 2nd.
Yeah. John Olerud, definitely a really, as you say, very interesting player. He had an insane year just overall. And the Blue Jays, meanwhile, in that second half, they kind of ended the month of July strong. They were a pretty streaky team, but they went 11-5 through the end of July. And at the deadline, they figured, hey, why not get more talent? And they got Ricky Henderson, who was having a great year.
Why not?
I believe he had a 1,000 OPS at the time, an over 1,000 OPS at the time, and obviously was stealing bases like no one else. So yeah, they get Ricky Henderson, a guy that you can put right at the top of the lineup immediately.
He gets
And
on first, he's guaranteed to be on third.
yeah, pretty much a guarantee. And from September 10th on, this was the key for the Toronto Blue Jays. They ended hot from September 10th on. They went 17-4,
That's
and
right.
that resulted in them winning the division with a 95-67 record, which was ultimately the best record in the American League.
Mhm.
And yeah, they're ready to go into the playoffs.
So one thing I did want to mention on September 10th, of course, the day that they started their 17-4 streak, they were actually in a tie with the New York Yankees for the division lead on that date. And well, the Yankees they did not go 17-4. I think that's a safe bet. Safe bet. So some fun facts about this team. John Olerud ended up winning the batting title that season. Right behind him in the AL for batting average was Paul Molitor, and right behind him was Roberto Alomar. That's 3 Blue Jays in the top 3 in the American League for batting average. They're the only team in MLB history since 1871. That's as far as Fangraphs goes back. To have 3 teammates lead their respective league in average. That has never happened again, and it hasn't happened. It didn't happen beforehand, which is insane. Um, and we will talk about this offense quite a bit, Chris. The Blue Jays scored double-digit runs in 18 of their games, and obviously they were 18-0 in said games. And they also, however, they had 15 games where they gave up double-digit runs. So the pitching did happen to be shaky. They had Jack Morris, who was on a bit of a decline. He ended up going 7-12 with a 6.19 ERA that season. They had let's see. Obviously, they had Dave Stewart, who did all right. Henkin, who kind of fell off after the All-Star break. Their best pitcher throughout the year probably ended up being Juan Guzman. He had some big moments in the regular season and as well as the postseason, which we'll get into. But in '93, Guzman had a 3.99 ERA, which is it's fairly exceptional. He actually ended up finishing 7th in the Cy Young voting. And also from Toronto, Dwayne Ward, the closer, ended up finishing 5th, and Pat Henkin finished 6th. So that's 5 through 7 in the AL Cy Young voting were all Blue Jays.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously shaky pitching, but they were able to get it done because of records. Pat Henkin, like I mentioned, was 19-9. With a 3.87 ERA. He was probably their best starting pitcher that season, 19-9. I know that win-loss record is sort of a statistic that's lost in time, but obviously this was a time where that was, heavily relied on, and that's pretty much what got him to 6th in that voting. Dwayne Ward, 45 saves and a 2.13 ERA, and Guzman, like I mentioned, he was 14-3. 14-3. He only lost 3 games the whole season, Chris. And
Yeah.
he had just about a 4 ERA, which is crazy given this this offense. This team had such an explosive offense. They had 4 guys in that lineup where you did not want to face them. You did not want to face Joe Carter. That's a guy with 30 home runs and 100 RBIs. You have Paul Molitor, over 3,000 hits, and by the way, he just finished 2nd in batting. You have John Olerud, who had an above 1,000 OPS, also a batting title. And you have Robbie Alomar, another great bat. A lot of contact hitters with some mixing in of some power, which is really nice. And then you add Ricky Henderson to all that, who is a guy who, if he gets on base, he's pretty much going to score with those 4 guys behind him almost every single time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that was one thing that I pointed out, or that I found out that I didn't really know about, was the team had speed. They had power, but they also had speed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have Devon White, who had 34 stolen bases. You have Ricky Henderson, who obviously steals bases. You have Robbie Alomar. Robbie Alomar had 55 stolen bases to go along with a 900 OPS that year. And even Paul Molitor at age 36. Fun
Yeah.
fact about Paul Molitor in 1993, he was the oldest player in MLB history to have a 2020 season. He had 22 home runs and 22 stolen bases. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they were first in the AL in stolen bases as well.
And I mentioned all those guys that you do not want to face that I just mentioned. You also, like you said, have Devon White, who ended up hitting 273 with a 779 OPS that season as a center fielder. Also a fantastic defender. You have Ed Sprague as their third baseman, hit 260. And they also had Pat Borders as their catcher with 254. 254 is a pretty good average as a catcher. Obviously, a 656 OPS is not exactly ideal, but that's not exactly what they're going for in that timeline. Also, he was very good at defense. He had a great arm. And Tony Fernandez ended up hitting 306 that season with an 803 OPS. So pretty much everyone in this lineup was average at the very least.
Yeah, for sure.
So going back to some little nugs about this team. Let's see. So obviously they had 18 games with double-digit runs. I mentioned that. They only got shut out once. Only once the whole regular season. And it ended up being Fernando Valenzuela, who at that point played for the Orioles. He had one random season with the Orioles, and he shut out the Blue Jays in that season. Obviously, I mentioned Joe Carter, a 30 and 100 season coming off of a free agent contract. Dwayne Ward, he was tied for fourth in the majors in saves. And John Olerud was second in WAR. He led the league in average, OBP, and OPS. Paul Molitor, 332 average. Was he 36 at that point?
Yeah, it was 36.
Age 36 season, 402 on base, 509 slugging, 911 OPS, the oldest player to go 20 for 2020. Robbie Alomar, 326 average, 408, 492, and 900 OPS. Also 55 stolen bases. 50 stolen bases with a 900 OPS. That does not happen very often. And as I mentioned, the pitching, they did have a few guys, that got into the Cy Young voting, but all in all, kind of mediocre. The team's ERA was 4.22, and it ranked 15th in all of baseball. And their 143 WHIP, it ranked 23rd out of 28 teams, might I add, because this was before a few expansion era teams even existed. And they were second in average as a team, third in RBI, and second in stolen bases. So that's in the whole league. Also ninth in home runs in the whole league. So this is a team that could do a little bit of both on offense.
So the offense was spectacular. Tons of star power. Their World Series roster had 3 Hall of Famers and a guy who's probably on the bubble with John Olerud. And then you have, that's just an explosive offense. And then everyone else is probably like average at best. So they head into these playoffs, and now they have to face the best pitching. They end up facing they end up getting thrown right into the fire. They're facing the 1993 AL Cy Young winner, Jack McDowell. And we're going to look at the Game 1 highlights for this series. I forgot to share the screen.
Classic.
It was just me watching it. I was just having myself a grand old time.
This team is fun to watch, Chris.
Yeah, you just find yourself doing this. So here we are. It's Game 1, looking at the highlights. Just out of reach. Ozzie Guillen, shout out to the 2005 White Sox. And there we are, little callbacks to both of our things from last episode. You had Ozzie Guillen who is the manager of the 2005 Chicago White Sox, and Paul Molitor, who we talked about last week, his great 1993 World Series or playoff run in general, which we're going to get into. But yeah, if you haven't listened to that episode, definitely make sure to listen. Very good episode we had last week. And so yeah, the Blue Jays end up winning 7-3
against the eventual Cy Young winner, Jack McDowell.
Yeah, definitely got to him, and was able to win that game by 4. And the Blue Jays also end up winning game 2. Dave Stewart just shut it down over 6 innings. Blue Jays also won, playing some small ball, won the game 3-1 in, not the most exciting fashion, but we're able to
get it done.
Shut it down, yeah. And in game 3, they dropped game 3. Going back home, they dropped game 3. Pat Hentgen had a bit of a struggle, and the Blue Jays offense didn't help him out the most either. The White Sox ended up winning that game 6-1. And game 4 was more of the same. Pitching did not do well, and the White Sox end up evening the series, making it 2-2. And then in game 5, pitching gets right back on track. Juan Guzman, one of the better guys on the Blue Jays staff, 7 innings, 3 hits, 1 run, 1 walk, and 6 strikeouts.
Masterful.
Third baseman Ed Sprague had 2 RBI in the game, and the Blue Jays ended up winning that game to give them the series lead 3-2. And then in game 6, you have basically the guy you want on the mound, the guy with the most postseason experience on the team. You got Dave Stewart, who shuts it down again. You have Dwayne Ward, one of the best closers in the league at the time, recording a 5-out save. And Devon White, not the biggest power hitter, but ends up hitting a home run in that game. And here we are. The Blue Jays are about to clinch their 2nd straight American League pennant. Here we are. You heard it. You heard it from Greg Gumbel. The Blue Jays are going back to the World Series.
So in the World Series, the Blue Jays face off against the Philadelphia Phillies, another NL East opponent, 2nd year in a row for that as well. And the offense got it going in game 1 against a young 26-year-old Kurt Schilling. Devon White ended up going 2 for 3 with a home run and a double. Also, Olerud hit a home run. Alomar hit a double, and he also had 2 RBIs. And the offense poured it on in game 1, and the Blue Jays took the win. In game 2 of the World Series, not the same. The Phillies were able to even it up. Stewart kind of got lit up, a 5-run 5th, highlighted by a 3-run home run by Jim Eisenrich of the Phillies. And it was a 6-4, pretty tough loss for the Jays. And in game 3,
you continue. I forgot to mention some stuff about the American League Championship Series. The American League Championship Series MVP winner was Dave Stewart. He ended up going 13 1/3, allowing 8 hits, 3 runs, 8 walks, 8 strikeouts, had a 2.03 ERA. Devon White ended up hitting .444 with an 1131 OPS. Paul Molitor, Paulie Playoffs, as you well should know, especially by this episode. Paul Molitor, 391 average, 481 on base, 696 slugging for an 1177 OPS. Of course, that would not be the best series for him. And then John Olerud had a 348 average with an 856 OPS, a 464 on base percentage to go with that. And then Juan Guzman was very good, had a 208 ERA in 13 innings pitched. Stewart and Guzman kind of just drove the way for the Blue Jays. I think they were the only two to win games for the Blue Jays, right?
That's right.
In that series.
Going back to the series, of course, where we're at, we're tied up 1-1. The Blue Jays offense destroyed Kurt Schilling in game 1, but Dave Stewart got lit up in game 2. And it's a 1-1 going into Veterans Stadium. And the Blue Jays offense turned it right back on in game 3. They scored 10 runs in game 3. Paul Molitor had 3 hits, one of them being a home run, also hit a triple. The Blue Jays as a team hit 3 triples. There was one by Devon White, and there was one by Alomar, as well as the one by Molitor. And game 4, so the Blue Jays are up 2-1. Game 4, a forgotten classic and an incredible Blue Jays comeback in Veterans Stadium. Chris is going to pull up the highlights in just a moment. We're going to watch a game that not many people realize was as exciting as it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely forgotten. I didn't know about it until just last week when we talked about Paul Molitor's career. And here he is. Here's Paul Molitor right here.
Score 3-0 Jays for Gosie's team down early. Bottom one, Bills down 3-1, bases full. Milt Thompson hits the drive to center. Devo hits the wall and can't get it. 3-run triple scores Dalton, Hollins, and Eisenreich. Bills now up 4-3. Thompson 5 ribbies on the night. Top still 4-3. Robbie Alomar singles. Todd Stottlemyre not used to base running, tries for third. Here comes Todd. The slide head first. He's toast. And he gets a bloody chin for his trouble. Bottom of 2, Lenny Dykstra. Well hit to right. Yes, you betcha. That's fair. 2-run homer, 6-3 Phils. Top 3 chasing right back. White kept the 4-1 rally with this single scoring Fernandez and Rob Butler. Jays now lead 7-6 to the 5th, tied at 7. Al Leiter gets lit. Darren Dalton. Roman aboard. Touch ball. That's gone. Phil's on top 9-7. Still in the 5th, Lenny Dykstra. And that's another hole in the O-zone. Second over of the game, 4 runs, 4 ribbies, 12-7 Phils. Now we go 14-9 Phils, top of 8. Jays come back 2 men on Molitor. Shot down to third, Hollins with the Matador defense. 14-10 Phils after the error. Then the foot gets open against the Wild thing. Base loaded. Ricky, the drive to center in front of Dykstra. 2 runs will score. Jays within 1, 14-13. Next batter, Devon White. Waiting the pitch. Stretch, swung on. Dykstra coming in. Can't get it. 2-run score. Henderson the go-ahead run. Jays up 15-14 after a 6-run 8th. Bottom of 9, Phil's down to the last out. Dave Hollins lifts the lazy fly to center. White makes sure he has it.
You heard that right. 15-14. Yes, the highest scoring game in World Series history, and I can't imagine it's been surpassed since. The closest anyone came, I believe, is Astros Dodgers.
That was 13-12.
That was 13-12. So yeah.
The Blue Jays were down 14-9 in the 8th inning and were able to muster 6 runs off the Phillies bullpen and get the eventual win to go up 3 games to 1. I'm sorry, 3 games to 1. And in Game 5, the Phillies were actually able to salvage a game at Veterans Stadium. Kurt Schilling did not emulate his first performance in the World Series. A complete game shutout in a 2-0 win for the Phillies. So the series shifts back to Toronto, and we're going to pick this up in the 7th inning. The Phillies score 5 runs in the 7th, and the Blue Jays go into the 9th, losing 6-5. And in the 9th inning, of course, the Phillies are 3 outs away from forcing a Game 7. And, as Kevin Millar said, anything can happen in Game 7. So, if you're the Blue Jays, you don't want to force a Game 7, even if it is going to be at your home ballpark. You want to wrap this thing up. And Ricky Henderson leads off the 9th with a walk. Devon White proceeds to fly out to left. And Paul Molitor singled, bringing up Joe Carter. Chris, this is a moment in history.
Balls and 2 strikes on it. Here's a pitch on the way, a swing and a belt. Left field, way back. Blue Jays win. The Blue Jays are World Series champions. As Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the 9th inning, and the Blue Jays have repeated as World Series champions. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
Yeah, if you're a baseball fan, you're very, familiar with that image. That's probably like this moment in baseball history, probably like top 10.
I'd say top 5. Like,
Yeah,
home run to win
top
the World.
5.
And not only that, but they were losing. Like,
Yeah,
a
they
lot
were
of people
losing,
forget the Blue Jays were 2 outs away from losing that game.
and they had blown the lead. They were
Yep.
they were up by 4, and they blow the lead. They're down 1, and yeah, Joe Carter, like a walk-off home run to end the World Series. That's pretty much automatically top 5. Him and Bill Mazeroski.
That's a little connection there.
Well, connection, yeah.
Roberto Clemente played for the other team that happened to. So in the World Series, despite Joe Carter having the biggest home run in easily the history of the Toronto Blue Jays, but possibly one of the best ones in the history of baseball, he did not win MVP of that series. As we discussed last week, Paul Molitor, 500, 571, 1,000, just his slugging percentage, 1,000, not even his OPS. His OPS, 1571.
Yeah, and 2 homers, 8 RBIs, 10 runs scored.
That's right. Also, Robbie Alomar, a 480 average, 519 on base, 640 slugging, and a 1159 OPS. Devon White, 292, 393, 708, 1101. And also some pitching. Pat Henkin had a 150 ERA in 6 innings pitched. And Dwayne Ward, 193 ERA with 2 saves and 4 2/3 innings pitched. So that wraps up the season for the back-to-back World Series champion Toronto Blue Jays. A absolutely perfect storybook ending to what their season was. My one takeaway with this team, Chris, is that they sort of debunked that narrative that exists that pitching wins championships. You know, everyone says it nowadays, like you got to have good pitching no matter what the offense is. If you don't have good pitching, you're not winning a championship. The Blue Jays didn't have the best pitching, and they won a championship. And I have some statistics here to prove just how good their offense was. Juan Guzman, I mentioned he went 14 and 3 earlier. He averaged 6.29 runs support per every start that he made. Like the Blue Jays were scoring 6 runs on average when he started.
Yeah, he had a 3.99 ERA. There were probably other guys in the league that had a 3.99 ERA and
like around 500,
and maybe even less.
Yeah. Pat Henkin, 590, 5.9 runs on average were scored when he pitched. Todd Stottlemyre, 4.91. Dave Stewart, 5.14. And Jack Morris, who went 7-12 with a 6.19 ERA and 152 innings pitched, 4.28 runs scored per every start that he made. Having 7 wins with a 6.19 ERA and even being able to stay in the rotation is very impressive. Obviously, Jack Morris is a Hall of Famer, but he was in his twilight years at that point. And it's admirable how great that offense was.
Yeah, for sure. I'm surprised that they weren't, first in every category. I mean, maybe it was a more offensive year, but yeah, just thinking about it, Olerud, Alomar, and Molitor were just absolutely insane that year.
Yeah, I mean, you could have made a legitimate case for any 3 of them to win MVP, and none of them did. Frank Thomas won it that year.
Yeah, what speaks to this team is Paul Molitor was 2nd in MVP, but he was 4th on the team in wins above replacement that year.
Yeah, that's right.
But it kind of made sense that he was 2nd in MVP.
It does. And, I mean, yeah, this team just had such a crazy offense that you didn't – there was not one single person where it's like, well, this is a guaranteed out. Like the closest thing would be Pat Borders, who even still had a 250 average as a catcher.
Yeah. I mean, a 786 team OPS, you don't really see a lot of that, or maybe last year you did, but you
But
didn't
not
see a lot of that
19.
before. This also, it was a team that kind of previewed that offensive peak of like the late 90s, and
Yeah.
I don't think anyone
This-
was really on the juice at the time.
Yeah, this team set the tone for what was about to be that decade of baseball.
Yeah, because the strike happens, and then it's basically a kind of a new league in 95. You got the home run chase of 98. You got Bonds and from 01 to 04. Kind of set the tone for those. Probably teams were kind of crafted from that 93 team because, teams probably realized, oh, we don't need the greatest pitching. I feel like those Yankees teams, like they had some good pitchers, but they didn't necessarily have aces. You don't really need aces. You just kind of need a solid staff and a really good offense. If you can
Statistically
do that.
speaking, the ace of the Blue Jays that year had a 3.87 ERA, and it was only a 24-year-old not making his first, but his first full season, Pat Hentgen.
Yeah, definitely a big legacy for sure.
I mean, obviously they didn't have the greatest pitching. It wasn't necessarily bad, but it was good, maybe even average, and that offense was still great enough to carry them to a World Series, which is something you're probably never going to see again from a team. You look at the 2019 Nationals, they had the best pitching in baseball. The team they beat in the World Series maybe had the second best pitching in baseball.
Yeah, you don't really see a lot of teams, like even the 2018 Red Sox were known for their offense, but they still had, Chris Sale, who was one of the best pitchers in the American League that year. Would have won a Cy Young if not for injuries, probably.
Yeah.
2017 Astros had Verlander and Keuchel. I mean, the 16, you could go through the whole Rolodex. I mean, maybe the 2015 Royals, but even they didn't really have any stars.
Exactly. I mean, this team featured a few Hall of Famers. Obviously, Jack Morris, he ended up being a Hall of Famer. Paul Molitor ended up being a Hall of Famer. Let's see, am I missing a few?
Roberto Alomar.
Roberto Alomar, Ricky Henderson ended up being a Hall of Famer. John Olerud, I would love to make a case for. Maybe we'll save that for a different show. But I believe that's it for Hall of Famers that this team featured.
Did Dave Stewart? I feel like Dave Stewart
I
came
don't believe he
close.
did. I don't believe he did, though.
Yeah, he was coming off the prime of his career, but I mean, he locked it down for the playoffs for sure.
Oh, he did. He was, ALCS MVP.
Yeah, and like we previewed before, this episode is definitely it's not gonna end this way because we still have to do our picks.
But this is how we close the door on the 93 Jays.
This is how we close the door on the 1993 Blue Jays. They were sponsored by Coca-Cola for reasons I don't really know, but you're gonna forget any reasons or any desire for reasons once this gets in your head because it is a jam.
This song will not leave your head. Absolutely beautiful.
Beautiful. And I think from that World Series DVD, I think they still had they had like those types of songs throughout the season. So they had different songs for each one, and that ultimately ended up being their
Yeah,
World Series
that's the one
champion
that passed
song.
on.
They had
Yeah,
one that like featured. They had ones that like mentioned the players, like Devon White was mentioned.
yeah.
I know that. I forget who else, but there were probably other players mentioned too. But yeah, they were. That's a jam, and I hope whoever's listening gets that out of their head eventually. But not the worst song to have in your head, for sure.
Not at all.
That closes the book on the 1993 Blue Jays.
Admirable team with a fantastic offense.
Yeah, a team to remember. Definitely star-studded, for sure. Not, some guys weren't in their prime at the time, like Dave Stewart, but definitely star-studded, and a team that other MLB organizations should take note of. A team where you lose some guys after you win a World Series championship, but you still try to go out and improve, which
Yeah.
some teams kind of get complacent after winning a World Series, maybe because they've just spent a lot of money. But the Blue Jays were definitely not worried about that, and probably the reason they were able to win that championship. But that leads us into the most exciting part of the show, at least for us, where we pick the so for those unaware, I didn't mention it at the beginning of the show, so I hope you're not too confused. But we pick, since there is no MLB season going on right now, when there usually would be, we have decided to make it more history-based, kind of a lesson for ourselves and the listeners, and also modernize how we view teams and players now. With Roberto Clemente, we were mentioning his wins above replacement, how we led the NL in position player war and didn't get MVP votes, and how maybe that would be different now. Just kind of ways how we modernize different players in different teams. But we decided that we would pick 30 players and 30 teams. I picked 30 players, number them 1 through 30. Daniel did the same with different teams, like the 1993 Blue Jays. So we pick a number. I pick a number to select the team. Whatever number is assigned to that team, that's the team we're talking about. And Daniel picks a number for the player, which for the player, and whatever player is assigned to that number is the player we're talking about. So who picked first last time?
I picked first last time. No, you picked first last time. You did.
Okay.
I think.
So
yeah.
You are going to pick a number 1 through 30, which will determine
the next week of our lives.
the next week of our lives.
I'm going to go with player number 26.
Number 26, a player that is still in the league, one of the greats, 3,000 hits, 600 home runs, Albert Pujols.
Albert Pujols. This is going to be a good one.
Yeah, this is
okay. I didn't realize we were still going modern players for this.
I wouldn't call him a modern.
Why not? I like it. All right, so Albert Pujols, a lot of MVPs, a lot of good numbers. That obviously they're modern, but a lot of good OPSs there, and some World Series is in there too, right?
Yeah, 2 World Series.
All right.
Good.
So I guess it's your turn, Chris.
So yeah, I'm gonna pick number 8.
Number 8. Okay, this is another World Series champion team. Actually, very similar era to the team we just did. This is the World Series champion, 1995 Atlanta Braves.
Nice.
The team that followed up this team because there was a strike.
Yeah, the
team of the
next World Series champion.
How about Chipper Jones, John Smoltz, Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine? How about Fred McGriff?
Yeah, this is a great team, and it was people talk about the 90s Braves. This was the only team to actually win it all. And fun fact, I think they were, before the Nationals, they were the only team since 1985 to win the World Series after sweeping the LCS. That's the one stat I went to before the Nationals. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah,
Older team, but that's all right.
yeah,
I'm
the
excited.
Braves. Yeah, the Braves are definitely an exciting one, and I know there's documentaries about the 1990s Braves,
Mhm.
and you know they
Atlanta
got to
will-
World Series before that, and eventually they got in. They won it all.
This is going to be a good one.
This is definitely going to be a good one. It's also our third team of the 1990s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely an exciting episode.
There
to
are
look
quite a few
forward to.
90s teams on here, though.
What?
There are quite a few 90s teams on here, though. We have not done all of them.
Yeah, it makes sense. We have the footage for them and, better
Mhm.
defensive metrics. So, yeah, that leads us to the conclusion of our episode. Thank you all for listening. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts somewhere in the future, whenever that may be, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. That YouTube channel is called STBNL with Christianta and Daniel Curran.
That's right.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Chris_Gianta. You can follow Daniel on Twitter at Daniel_Curran. And there we are. I hope you enjoyed our Roberto Clemente 1993 Blue Jays episode. And we look forward to seeing you again for our Albert Pujols
and the 1995 Atlanta Braves.
in the 1995 Braves episode. See you next time.